Rejection of goods. When goods are delivered to the buyer, he refuses to accept them. Having the right to do so, he is not bound to return them to the seller. He must inform the seller that he has rejected the goods. Refusal to take the delivery. When the seller is ready to deliver the goods and requests the buyer to take the delivery, the buyer does not take the delivery of goods within reasonable time. The buyer is liable to the seller for any loss arising due to the refusal. Rights of a buyer. Well, a buyer has got few rights. Number one is right to take the delivery. It is a right of the buyer to take the delivery of the goods according to the terms of the contract. Right to reject. If the seller sends the buyer a larger or smaller quantity of goods against the contract, the buyer may reject or accept the whole or accept or reject the rest. He can refuse to accept the goods in installments. Right to notice of insurance. When the goods are sent by the seller to the buyer via sea route, the buyer has a right to be informed by the seller so that he may get the goods insured. Right to examine. The buyer has a right to examine the goods which he has not previously examined before he accepts them. Right to sue for the damages. When the seller refuses to deliver the goods to the buyer may sue the seller for the damages caused by the non delivery. Right to sue for the price. If the buyer has paid the price and the goods are not delivered, he can recover the amount. Right to sue for performance. The buyer may sue the seller for specific performance of the contract. If the goods are specific, the court may order the performance of the contract. Right to sue for breach of warranty. When there is a breach of warranty by the seller, the buyer can the buyer cannot reject the goods. He can sue for the damages only, but he cannot reject them. Right to cancel the contract. When the seller cancels the contract before the date of delivery, the buyer may cancel the contract or wait for the date of delivery. Right to sue for interest. When there is a breach of contract on the part of the seller, the buyer has a right to claim the interest on the amount. What are the duties of a buyer? Duty to accept the goods. It is the duty of the buyer to accept the goods and pay for them according to the terms of the contract. Duty to apply for delivery. It is the duty of the buyer to apply for the delivery of the goods. Duty to demand delivery. It is the duty of the buyer to demand for the delivery of goods at a reasonable time. Duty to take the risk of deterioration. When the seller agrees to deliver the goods at his own risk at a place other than where they are when sold, the buyer shall take a risk of deterioration in the goods. Duty to inform the seller. It is the duty of the buyer to inform the seller if he refuses to accept the goods. Duty to take delivery. It is the duty of the buyer to take the delivery of the goods within a reasonable time. Duty to pay price. When the ownership in goods passes to the buyer, it is the duty of the buyer to pay the price according to the contract. Duty to pay for the damages. When the buyer refuses to accept and pay for the goods, he will have to compensate the seller for the damages for non acceptance. And now we come to the next topic of our tutorial on mercantile law, and the topic is unpaid seller. The seller of goods is deemed to be an unpaid seller when whole of the price has not been paid or tendered, or when a bill of exchange or other negotiable instruments has been received as a conditional payment, it has been dishonored. The term seller includes any person who is in the position of a seller, for example, an agent of the seller. There are features of the unpaid seller.